Welcome back to Stay in Your Lane. I'm your host, John Maley. This is brought to you by Triple T Transport. Today we got another gentleman that I really, really respect and I appreciate his time. We got Bob Costello. Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good. How you doing, John? It's great to be here.
Good. Hey, you got to be really, really busy with everything going on. The ATA, you guys, I believe, hear a lot of stuff coming. And then what's going on in our industry from an inflation and economic perspective. So everyone is dealing with inflation right now, Bob. And for our viewers and listeners out there, if you understand and you're dealing with inflation, hit the like button, subscribe, communicate. We want to hear your thoughts. What do you see?
You're right. There's a lot going on. That's for sure. It is. It's interesting to try to read the tea leaves right now, right? And you just threw a lot at me. So one is, the freight market is slowing. It's not collapsing like the spot market. We recently put out some numbers that show in terms of contract freight. It's not going gangbusters, but it's not collapsing either. I expect it to be a muted fall freight season. Consumers are transitioning back to services more than they are in terms of buying goods. Also, inflation, as you mentioned, eats into how much consumers will spend on certain products, right? So if you're a household and you're spending more to buy groceries, well, then that's less money that you have available to buy other goods. With that said, again, I'm not saying that there's going to be a collapse in the freight market or in the goods market. It will slow a little bit this year and next year, but I don't see that. In terms of inflation, it's really two different types. So just like the truck market, by the way, I think is bifurcated. It's spot is really tough and contracts not too bad. I think inflation at this point is a little bit is bifurcated. Goods inflation overall, if we take out sort of the commodity-based stuff, goods inflation is, it looks like we hit peak inflation in terms of goods, but services, is going up and accelerating. And really, if you think about it, as households, we spend more on services than we do on goods. So that's really what the Federal Reserve is grappling with, and why I think they stay the course in terms of increasing interest rates throughout the rest of this year, including a meeting coming up here soon. Energy markets, as you mentioned, really interesting, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is, one of the things is going on is Europe is weaning itself off of Russian energy, right? It's
Right.
not there yet. And one of the things that they need is not only LNG from the US, but they are going to need more diesel from the US. Well, diesel inventories in the United States are very lean. And we're coming into, it's starting to really cool off. You can tell by my attire here. And that means we need not only diesel to haul freight around, but we need a diesel in the Northeast to heat a lot of homes. And so I think there's going to be some upward pressure on this winter, not only on prices, but we may see, I don't want to cause any panic. I'm not saying we're going to see shortages, but one of the things this administration is grappling with is, do we put an end to diesel exports? And yet that's a tough thing to do, because it's our allies in Europe that are going to need it, because they're weaning themselves off of Russian diesel and other energy goods and products. So I think the energy market is something that people need to watch as we go forward through the rest of this year and early next year, because it could get really interesting.
I saw last night that we were at a 50-year low on our reserves.
Yeah, that's the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And the administration decided to help with oil prices, that they were going to dump that oil onto the market for additional supply. Of course, OPEC Plus has decided that they were going to cut. Now, listen, in reality, they were not producing all that they could. Okay, they weren't there anyway. So I don't know how much of that reduction is real and how much of it's more of a signal to the market from their perspective. But Yeah, we sold a lot of oil out of that strategic petroleum reserve that we've got in the U.S. and got it down to a decades low level. And should again, this is I don't think we're going to be there, but should there be any problems this winter, we don't have a lot of supply in that left. So that'll be interesting. And then what does the government do when they go to restock it, right? Then they're buying more oil off of the market, and that's going to drive up price. So there's some things that are, energy policy this fall and winter into next year is really going to be interesting. One last thing on this, John, is our shale oil, right? I mean, we can produce more, although it seems to be leveling off here. Remember when when the Saudis pump oil, I mean, they make money at just a few dollars a barrel. I mean, it's quite remarkable. It's easy to get it out of the ground there. Shale's not that way, right? Shale's a lot more cost and production intensive than it's gotten better over the years, but it's still a lot more than, say, in Saudi Arabia. So, they make more, the price of oil has to be higher for us to be able to pump. But at the end of the day, it's refining capacity that is really limited in the US and in Europe. And in Europe, it's limited because they just relied on Russia. Russia produces a lot of diesel, and they were just sending straight diesel to Europe that they're not going to have anymore. And they were relying on that come early next year. In the US, we haven't built a new refinery in, 2.5 decades. And yes,
we've reduced refineries. We've gone down, right? We have less.
Yes, we have less. Now, it doesn't mean that the ones we have, those have expanded production, right? Okay. So, but we do have fewer of them. And think about this. Forget all the red tape. Like, let's just put the red tape aside and let's say there was none. Do you really want to invest billions of dollars into a refinery when you see that the US government is pushing alternative fuels like electric for cars, right? I don't know that you want to do that. So that's, some of the issues that are, hurdles in energy policy.
Well, no, I think that's definitely a different perspective than we see. We know that there's different types of crude. There's different types of, shale oil, et cetera. I don't know that most people realize it's probably more expensive to convert for us a lot of those products than even the $5 mark we're seeing today.
Yeah. So, you bring up a good point, and that is our refineries, because for years and years, we got our crude oil from Venezuela. That's heavy sour crude. Our refineries are set up to refine heavy sour. When you frack and you get oil from shale, it tends to be light, sweet crude. So what we do is we will import, not from Venezuela anymore, but we will import the heavy sour and we will export the light sweet because our refineries are not set up to refine the oil that we generally produce. One of the things the administration has talked about, and it's very controversial, is, okay, do we put some pressures on Venezuela to make some changes in their with their government, in their society, and then we would start allow the purchases of Venezuelan oil again. So that's also something that in terms of energy policy they're looking at.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, like you said, changes in policy, 3 to 5 quarters. We're coming up on, the 3-quarter mark when interest rates started to be bumped. By the end of the year, I mean, we're going to be at that 3-quarter point.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're talking about maybe GDP and all, I think the GDP in the third quarter is going to be not bad. I think the likelihood of a recession happening, and I think that has definitely gone up, and I would say is probably the baseline forecast right now is for a shallow, not a terrible recession, right? But a recession nonetheless is probably early next year, and it's going to be relatively short. The way we stand. But we've seen the most aggressive interest rate hikes that we have seen in decades. Right. And it is, really only the early 80s and the early 70s is even matching, is surpassing it. Otherwise, it's the most aggressive we've seen. So that's it takes 6 to 9 months to fully, when interest rate hikes go into effect, the full ramification of that doesn't hit for 6 to 9 months. So we've still got a lot of that to go. That's why I think it's early next year when you start to see a moderate recession.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think the reality is in the trucking industry, I don't think we're going to see diesel come down. If anything, I think I would be guessing it's going to go up for a while, especially through the winter and into the spring. Would you say that's accurate or inaccurate
You
from your
know,
seat?
that is probably the case. I will tell you that energy prices are one of the things I hate to forecast,
Yeah,
and nobody's very good at it, right?
right.
It is very difficult. But in general, the way things look today, it is much more likely that those prices go up, not come down.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's I don't think that anybody who's been paying attention is going to argue that. So I hope that that didn't put you in an unfair position asking or phrasing the question that way. So energy prices and diesel fuel are somewhat tied together, and in a lot of areas. And with the war going on, right, in Europe, the impact of what's being done to try and be a lot of the countries over there to be independent, that's putting more pressure on what we're doing, on top of trying to sustain for ourselves, right?
Yes.
So it's a big picture, definitely. Thank you for sharing that with
It's a
us.
global, everybody asks, is the US energy independent? No, we're not. Okay. Even because of the things I talked about earlier, we do produce a lot of oil, like in the top three in the world, but we export a bunch of that and we import as well. So we are interdependent. We're not energy independent as a result.
Right, and that makes sense. When you said we've kind of peaked on inflation, you think it's for most durable goods?
Listen, I think inflation is going to stay overall going to stay stubbornly high. Okay. But I do think there are signs that in the goods side of the economy and outside of commodities, that we have seen what we call peak inflation. In other words, the year over year gains have hit their highest level and it's coming down, but it doesn't mean that it falls significantly either, right? So we've hit what we call peak inflation on the good side. I don't know that we've hit peak inflation on the services side yet.
Services side,
Yeah.
right? That may still be coming, but no, I think that you bring up some really good points there for all of our listeners. I don't know that anybody has a crystal ball, but we're very, very appreciative and thankful for what you're able to share with us, because there's no other way to look at it. You bring a value and you give us a different perspective, and you give our viewers a different perspective and understanding what we're all dealing with, and that it's unilateral. Even if we're independent in the United States from an energy perspective, we still are supporting other people and working with other countries, so that the interdependent scenario is always going to be there, unless everybody in the world is totally independent.
Yeah, that's not the case. No, it's right. I would tell your listeners, really watch the energy markets coming up, because I think there's going to be our allies that are going to be hurt even more than we are from this, are going to need our help, but that's going to put a lot of upward pressure,
On
most
us.
likely on our own energy market.
Well, that's definitely understandable, and I see that picture. I didn't have that picture before sitting down here with you, so always appreciate you, Bob.
And no problem.
All right, you take care, and thank you.